I'm John Siegenthaler once again. Welcome to A Word on Words. Our guest is Dorothy Marcic. Welcome to A Word on Words.
Thank you.
It's Dr. Marcic, Professor Marcic,
Yes.
Arthur Marcic. It's great to have you here to talk about respect, women, and popular music. Respect, women, and popular music. This is a fun book to read, and the concept of the book, as I analyze it, traces the evolution of really women's rights in the society and women's role in the society, and tracking it with changes in the musical culture. Is that fair?
That's very accurate, yes. Yes, because what I did is I took all the top 40 songs of women in the 20th century and analyzed the lyrics and followed the categories through the century and gave excerpts of some songs in there and talked about it in relationship to when women were getting the right to vote or going into the workplace and so on. And you can really see the changes in the themes of music. And it isn't that I just picked songs out of the air. I actually measured and counted how many songs were of a certain type in each decade.
And then what I find fascinating is that you insert periodically into the book comments from women, some men, who've been moved, touched, whose lives at times have been impacted by the lyrics of music, particularly songs that call for an emotional response on the part of women. And you know, male chauvinist pig like me, 75 years old, I never, in my life it never would have occurred to me to evaluate or juxtapose the obvious evolution of women power in the society with the music. But once I read the book, it is there. It's right there. But talk to me a little bit about why you got these dozens of people to talk to you about how an individual lyric hit them right where they lived.
Well, I can't even remember how I got the idea, but I've been writing books for a long time. This is my 12th book, and sometimes I just get inspirations. And it came to me to have people talk about their own experience with music, how it had impacted their lives. And so I sent out on every listserv I could find and everybody I knew asking if there was a song that had touched them in some way in their life. And it turned out that people ended up forwarding it on to friends, and I ended up with a lot of stories. I didn't even include them all in the book because I had so many. I've got another book I'm trying to get published of just the stories. But wonderful stories of people, a man whose mother had committed suicide, and the song that he listened that soothed his heart in years after that. Another woman who lost her virginity at age 14 and the humiliation she suffered and the song she listened to that helped her get through that. A woman who had a stillborn child and was nearly killing herself from drug and alcohol abuse, and then happened to listen to a Tammy Wynette song and woke her up. She went and poured the booze down the toilet and threw the pills away and slapped herself in the face, and she credits Tammy Wynette for saving her life. I mean, these are incredible stories.
They are incredible stories, and some have real impact. I was particularly interested in the book because my wife was quite a good pop singer. I still sleep in the bed Arthur Godfrey bought for us when she sang with Arthur Godfrey. But I will just tell you, Gloria Gaynor's "I Will Survive" is the song that rings her bell. If I put on that CD, it evokes a response from her. Now I don't know whether she's surviving me or life in general, or whether she just loves Gloria Gaynor and loves to do a little dance occasionally when that song just balls out of that speaker. But I told her about the responses to that song, which is phenomenal. What's your favorite? Which one moved? What song moved the author the most?
Well, I have to say, "I Will Survive" is one of my all-time favorites. But I also am moved by, I love Janice Ian's work. So her at 17 and Society's Child, whenever I hear those. Hero, Mariah Carey's song about inner strength. In fact, I was performing my show last year in Hawaii at several venues, and one of them was a women's prison.
This is this one-man show you do.
Yes,
it really takes the book and puts it on stage.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. And one of the venues I had was at a women's prison. And when in the show, I have song excerpts of about 30 songs. Sometimes it's 15 seconds, sometimes it's a minute. And then I talk about the progress of women. Well, I normally do about 30 seconds of Hero, but the women in the prison kept singing the song. That was so meaningful for them because they were learning how to look within themselves rather than outside. So those are songs that really touch me. But I have to say, "I Will Survive." I'll never get tired of that song. And it's not only the message, but the beat. There's a combination of that there. And I think I use that song in my show, and women always, people start clapping, they stand up. There's something about that song that calls on this inner need to stand on our own and to finally be able to have our own life rather than always leaning on a man.
And that is really that is really the statement that reflects the evolution of the music and the evolution of the women's movement.
Yes.
It seems to me.
It really did, because the songs in the 20s, for example, the top 40 songs were songs like Fanny Brice's song, "My Man," I love him so, "He Beats Me Too, What Can I Do?" Or "Mean to Me" by Ruth Etting, which is, "Why must you be mean to me? You're always scolding me in front of people."
You talk about archetypes, and you say Joan gave us really this term, this word, and then as we go through, we get many different examples of archetypes in the book. Talk about the point of that.
Well, the point of that is that there are these enduring characters, or you might call them archetypes, that appear throughout history. You can go back to the Greek mythology, any of the fairy tales. You've got the villain, the hero, the seductress, the victim, and so on. And so I tried to find...
Poseidon you cite, I think.
Yes. And so I tried to find the archetypes that were constant in the music, or at least appeared more than in one song, that they seem to be common. For example, the victim and the martyr was a very common archetype in the first 60 years of the 20th century, but after the 60s, the percentage of those reduced. And the Wonder Woman is hero, the Wonder Woman, warrior, you would say in the masculine terms, didn't really appear until the 60s and later. So there was a real shift in the 60s in what the messages of women's music were.
Going all the way back, Ruth Etting's 10 Cents a Dance.
Yes.
The Depression period, Love for Sale, Helen Morgan.
Yeah, those were songs that with a lot of negative self-image in them, and why was I born? What's the point of me living? In 10 Cents a Dance, he just buys this for me. That's all I'm good for. And in the 30s, there were a lot of songs like that. Or else you had the Betty Boop, I Want to Be Loved by You, where she sings
Nobody
in this real
else
baby.
but you.
Right, and that's my biggest desire, is to fill all your needs.
That's right. You know, and she dressed as if she were perfectly ready to do it, you know.
Right. And you know, an interesting thing, I didn't realize this till I was doing the research, but before the Hays Code came in 1935, she was so scantily dressed. It was, and it
Believe
it
it or not, I can remember.
Yes, can you?
I don't have much memory for those days, but I remember Betty Boop scantily dressed.
And that Betty Boop archetype...
We won't say what year the Hays Code
right.
came in.
the Betty Boop archetype is one that has persisted too, because Marilyn Monroe took it on in the 50s and early 60s, and the modern day Betty Boop is Britney Spears.
You use the word in the you use the word in this women in popular music. You use the word popular music, but country music also is factored into the story in a very, very meaningful way, and it's mentioned dominantly in the foreword by. It's a wonderful foreword.
It is by Sheila Shipley Beatty. She did a wonderful job, and she was the first woman who had any authority in the country music business.
Yes.
She lived all of those changes.
She was a Decca.
Yes,
that's
she
right.
Became vice president of Decca. Well, country music, what I did is I only measured in my research the top 40 songs. I was trying to have some boundaries there that were reasonable to work with, but there were a lot of crossover hits from country into the top 40, and so that's where that came in. And in fact, country music, the themes that women were singing in popular music in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which was about, they finally were saying, he's a creep, and I don't want to have him anymore.
Yeah.
The country music had been singing that for a long time.
The 1960s really was the he's a creep songs.
Yes, but I just can't
And with
help
all
myself.
respect to Tammy, Stand By Your Man was...
1968.
Let me just tell those of you who are tuning in just now, I'm talking to Dorothy Marcic about her book, Respect Women in Popular Music. How do songs like Strange Fruit on one side and Somewhere Over the Rainbow on the other fit into this pattern?
That's a very good question. Well, Strange Fruit did hit the top 40, which was surprising to me, although it was banned in so many southern radio stations. That was a story about the hanging, the mostly black men, lynchings in the South. And that was what you might call a set breaker song, because it was about the same time, by the way. It was a few years after Kate Smith's number 12 song, That's Why Darkies Were Born. So you had, in a way, two opposing forces of this accepting of the status quo, that's why darkies were born, and then Billie Holiday talking about the horrendous outcomes and pain that strange fruit hanging from the trees.
Whenever I hear that song, it still just chills me.
What I found in my research is that when she sang that song, she always did it as the last song of the night in the nightclub, because she couldn't sing after that, and the audience wasn't prepared to hear anything after that because it was so haunting. So those were giving the, let's say her song was giving the reality, but then there were the other songs that were Somewhere Over the Rainbow. As optimistic as it was still this, what we would call external locus of control, which is somebody else is going to solve it for me. If only I can get to the other side of the rainbow, my life is going to be okay, and everything's going to be peachy. Similar to Que Sera Sera, which was everybody else is going to take care of me. That changed later on when women started looking at themselves. But I think Billie Holiday had songs that were deeper and looking at the darker side of what was going on.
Early on, you talk about Hank Thompson's classic and Kitty Wells' classic of all classics. Talk about that a little bit.
Remind me which song.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about. I didn't know God made honky tonk angels, and God didn't make. It wasn't God that made honky tonk angels, because it seems to me that is country. But Kitty Wells, long time ago, I mean, was thinking about getting out of the business, and they come along with this song, and it just blows right off the charts. And it's a direct answer to his classic that said, that sort of blames honky tonk angels. I mean, it puts women in a very demeaning role. That song did. And she saw it and just comes back and said, look, don't blame this on God.
There was too, I think in country music, there was those competing forces also, because there was women trying to be pushed down, but at the same time there were a lot of women that were Kitty Wells and Loretta Lynn.
Loretta Lynn, The Pill,
yes,
banned from the radio in many markets.
Don't come home.
Don't come home drinking with loving on your mind.
Right,
That's
and DIVORCE.
That's right. And that's where the change is beginning to take hold, not just on the country charts, but also in popular music.
Yeah, I think popular music was impacted by the blues. African American women started out singing the blues in the early part of the century, and then not many of them hit the top 40. There was a couple of them, but then Dinah Shore came out with Blues in the Night in 1942. But that was so much about what the African American women singing, which was basically what country women started singing a few decades later was, you know, he's not such a great guy after all.
Right, and then you get to the 60s, and Aretha Franklin comes with Natural Woman, and you're there.
Right, and then
are getting there.
Then the pop started taking on what country and blues had been saying for decades. So it is really interesting to look at the influences of all that.
Helen Reddy, I Am a Woman.
Yeah.
And well, Kenny Rogers' Lucille. Let's talk about.
Right, that was the only song
Find time to leave me, Lucille.
Most of the
400 children, a crop in the field.
All the reminiscences, except for that one, were about songs that women sang. But that was such a good story, and it was from the point of view of a woman, so I chose that. But one woman was telling how her husband had made her take care of the kids. She worked, and he expected her to do everything. So when that first song came out, she said, "I thought it's about time you learned what we women are going through."
That's right. One of those reminiscences that you insert was Lynn Phillips of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, who says, "Welcome to the wonderful world of wives and mothers, Guy. Have a toast to what we live, taste of what we live every day." It's wonderful. Well, that sort of thing runs all through this book. It's not only a fascinating read, but it's an entertaining read in the process. And then, of course, Dolly's 9 to 5 sort of takes it one step beyond there.
Yeah, where she looks at the oppression in the workplace when women are finally talking about that. And that's a song that people still resonate with today, even though it was a couple decades ago.
Now, the whole question of codependency and compliance fits into this theme. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, the first 60 years, the dominant category for women's music was codependency and compliance. Not only My Man, I Love Him, So He Beats Me Too, but even into the early 60s, I Will Follow Him, Johnny Get Angry, I Want a Caveman, I Want a Brave Man, I'm Wishing and Hoping That He'll Love Me. It was all of this, or I Want to Be Wanted, Brenda Lee. There were so many songs like that. And then it broke in the 60s when we started getting the anger, what I call in the book the teenage rebel phase. We went from childhood dependency to teenage rebel. You don't own me, these boots are made for walking. And I'm telling you, that's when
Nancy Sinatra.
Nancy Sinatra, and my husband says that that's a song that really scared men. And I'll tell you, when I do that song in the show, all the women start singing it. It's another one, like I Will Survive. It's one of those that just brings them out there. And so we kind of went through that. Now, there still are codependent songs. I read an article about a year ago in the paper that said, we haven't come anywhere. We still have all these needy songs. Well, yes, we do have needy songs, but the percentage of them is a lot better.
Well, I thought, you know what? I began to think about this, and my first reaction was the consumer market changed some. I mean, women related to the music and began buying music that reflected new goals, new ambitions, a new vision of themselves.
Yeah.
Some of them were maybe buying the music pop brought home. Some of them were playing what the male disc jockeys were playing. Having said that, as I read the list in the back of all those 40 songs, I was struck by how men wrote so many of those songs. Even, I mean, it indicates that songwriters have their pulse on that consumer market out there. And maybe even on the heartbeat of the buyer. Because women, my guess is, women are buying the songs in greater numbers than ever before, and are relating to the music as never before. I mean, you've really got to want to listen to Nancy Sinatra if you're a man, and she's going to scare you to death by walking on you with those boots.
Probably not going to buy her a CD, right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
On the other hand, Gloria Gaynor, I mean, I can't imagine anybody, male or female, not wanting to listen to that, because there are a lot of men that need to survive too, you know, and she really gives, if you don't listen to all the lyrics, she'll give a fella a boost.
Yeah. Well, I think you bring up a good song about the story, bring up a good point about the songwriters, because up until Carole King in the 50s and 60s, most songwriters were men. She broke that pattern. But now women tend to write their own music, and in the late 90s, women's music started selling more than men. So we had a big shift there, and lots of changes, as you mentioned.
I noted that in a couple of instances, the Andrews sisters were on the cutting edge of change with songs they recorded just slightly ahead of the curve. Now, let's talk a little bit about what goes inside the dynamic of music. Artists, for the most part, are playing to the culture, not pushing the envelope. I mean, Loretta Lynn's push, Dolly Parton's push, Gloria Gaynor's push, Nancy Sinatra's push, Ruth Etting was playing to a culture when 10 Cents a Dance was part of the Depression experience. But if you're a singer, I mean, if you're Doris Day, and you're singing to the women of that time, you're probably singing Que Sera.
Yes.
At what point does the artist and the music serve as a magnet to pull the movement ahead?
That's a really good question. See, I only looked at top 40, because sometimes people say, well, why didn't you include the Indigo Girls?
Sure. The
Indigo Girls never hit the top 40, but they were pulling. They became role models for some of the later music that did hit the top 40. Joan Baez had only 2 top 40 songs, which was surprising to me. So there's, let's say, thousands of songs recorded every year, but only a small portion of those hit the top 40. Some of those songs that don't hit the top 40 are pulling, and just as the blues later became part of top 40. So some of those, what you might call fringe groups, end up being set breakers, moving us forward. But then there are some singers that take more risks and actually do become top 40 as well. Something about the messages just write exactly what people want to hear at that point.
Toward the end of the book, there's a chapter that it doesn't directly juxtapose women's progress and the songs, but there are separate lists of achievements that focus on such things as the number of women executives in the top Fortune 500s, the number of women whose income now exceeds $500,000 a year. You point out Sandra Day O'Connor was the first woman on the list. And you don't say any of this is because of the music or that the music responds to that. On the other hand, a few pages later, there is a list of those songs arranged chronologically as they came out. And you take those two, I say pages, really a couple of pages in each case, and it makes you wonder, was it the chicken or the egg? What's your guess? My
guess is that there were some larger forces that both of them were reflecting. Because I've recently done a study of music, men's music, because people say, well, what about the men's music? So I did a similar one and developed a presentation on leadership. And the men's progress is somewhat different in the music. But what it showed me is how there are some larger shifts in the culture that the music and women getting positions of power and so on are reflecting. And one other point too is how when women were portrayed as codependent, men were selfish and abusive creeps. But as women got equality, men were decent people. So it was good for both genders.
What are you working on now?
Well, I'm turning this into a commercial venture. I've got a Broadway producer working with me. The one-woman show that I have now, we're going to spiff it up and take it on the road. It's really exciting, and working with somebody who's helping me with the script, a local person too.
Well, you won't have another book to bring back to me, but I'll get to go to Broadway and see you on the stage.
Yes, you will.
Well, we've run out of time, and I've been talking with Dorothy Marcic about her new book, Respect Women in Popular Culture. Thank you for coming.
Oh, it was a pleasure.
Thank all of you for coming. I'm John Siegenthaler for Word on Words. Keep reading.